Fahad is asking, we hear about midlife crisis. How do we view growing old in Islam?
So, Brother Fahad, this is a very interesting question. I would say there are a couple of concepts that need to be unpacked here. One is the actual phenomenon of someone reaching a certain stage, which we tend to call, societally speaking, a midlife sort of stage, a midlife crisis. And that's a phenomenon which perhaps is observable in different eras and different cultures in and of itself, and what the drivers for that may be. Secondly is the concept of growing old in and of itself. And the two do come together in your question. But first of all, the idea of actually growing old and then reaching this midlife sort of point, you do notice quite naturally the phenomenon that a person, as they pass a certain point, which may be roughly described as what ordinarily people feel, societally speaking, could be their midpoint, that they start intrinsically, subconsciously reaching that line of thought where they're doing a self-assessment of sorts. You know, where's my life? What have I achieved in my life so far? And where's my life heading? Sometimes that leads to something of a crisis of sorts, or feeling like they're in crisis. But really, it's rediscovering where they really find themselves, regrounding themselves, and in a way coming up with something of a plan, informal as it may be, of how they are planning to spend the next life, the next few years or couple of decades, if Allah grants them that sort of time on earth, as servants of Allah, worshippers of Allah, or as human beings if they're not Muslim. Now the point is, that's a natural phenomenon, and it's a very healthy one, albeit can be a bit arduous and challenging for the one going through it. It's healthy because life is ultimately a test. And so taking stock of one's deeds at every single instant, every single day even, is something healthy. And no doubt when you're at that midpoint, or potentially a midpoint, it could be way past one's midpoint even, when one thinks is a midpoint, is something which is natural and not harmful in and of itself. The issue of growing old, however, almost exacerbates that and can aggravate that in a way where, societally speaking, we've become so materialistic in our, or with a skewed perspective when it comes to our relationship with materialism, such that your value as an individual is based on your economic productivity. And in a situation where many people lose, finding themselves often out of work as soon as they're sometimes in their 50s, sometimes, mid 50s, etc. I know many people in that sort of situation who'd been working in the city and the like, and they found their careers kind of coming to an end. And some people working way beyond that. But just to give you that overall backdrop, all of a sudden, you find that actually, if it's all about being young, looking good, so-called, being glamorous, having the maximum vitality and vigor, and that's where, and being able to be economically productive, then there's little wonder that you're going to end up feeling down as one grows old. However, there's an alternative narrative, and that exists within Islam and beyond, where old is gold, and the value of people is seen beyond their economic productivity and how youthful they look, but also what wisdom they've accumulated, what experiences they have, and what value they can give through that wisdom and experiences that they've accumulated, how pious they are as individuals from an Islamic perspective, how much they've been managed to stay within the limits that Allah set for us as individuals, as human beings, as Muslims, as worshippers of Allah, and actually recognizing there's always an opportunity to get closer to Him and thus fulfill one's purpose of existence, no matter how young or old a person is. So that's wherein the antidote lies. Therein. And of course, we can all help to try and improve that by renewing our discourse and our narrative surrounding age, and by also trying to reach out to elderly people in our families, in our communities, and showing them that respect in our families via our parents, our grandparents, our uncles and aunties, and also within our neighborhoods, and running those campaigns of raising awareness, showing that ihtiram, that respect and that regard for people who have that standing. Allah says, or the Prophet ﷺ says in the hadith, "Inna min ijlallahi ta'ala ikram the shaybatil muslim." It's part of your reverence of God that you show respect and due regard to the person who's grown old. And the separate hadith where the Prophet ﷺ says that man shaba fil islami shay, whoever grows old in Islam, then this will be a light for them in the hereafter. The hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, that he sees a dream, he sees Jibreel alayhi salam coming, and then he sees two men, and he gives one of them, the younger man, the miswak, a toothstick or something, let's just say. And Jibreel says to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, correcting him, Kabbir, ya Muhammad, Kabbir. The older one first, the older one first. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is seated and he's there, and a man comes representing his tribe, and others are there. A youngster comes forward to speak first, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, the older one first, the older one first. So the elders have a right, I don't mean a monopoly, but they have a position. The youth have a position, and each needs to play their role, and there's a symbiosis which leads to a flourishing and thriving society with the permission of Allah, and Allah knows best.
In a society that we live, especially in this part of the word old is frowned upon. No one would like to hear the word old, even if they are genuinely old.
Yes.
How do we tackle this as within Muslim community? Because as Muslim, we know the definition of young, we know the definition of old, and you have clearly explained. Now, is this something that we should use it in a negative connotation? Is it something that we should embrace it? What should we do?
Quite the contrary to being an issue from an Islamic angle. Even the very basic concept of leading salah, the Prophet ﷺ said, Ya Ummul Qawma aqra'uhum li kitabillah. The one who knows who's most proficient in the recitation and the understanding of the Quran has the first precedence and priority when leading the prayers. If there's two people there, myself and yourself, who's most proficient? Thereafter, the one who knows the Sunnah best, and the one who did Hijrah. Thereafter, who is the eldest? The eldest has a priority in the standing, right? The Prophet ﷺ said, Laysa minna, they're not of us, the one who does not respect the elder and have mercy on the younger, right? So each one has their standing, and old should not be a word that's frowned upon. Rather, it's one which we recognize means you have, hopefully, an accumulation of wisdom and experience. It's not the case with everyone.
Correct.
But it is something which we should take as our starting point and a point of departure.
And fortunate are those that have actually gone to that stage, because not many are fortunate to reach to that stage, because now we're here, young people are sadly passing away without any prior medical illness or any health issues. So that should be a blessing that Allah has, especially as Muslim, that Allah has granted us hayatan tayyibah, and long may it continue, isn't it?
Absolutely correct.